My husband laughed at my worthless family inheritance at his company gala. Minutes later, he discovered it owned 51% of his business. I'll never forget his face when he learned who really controlled his empire. My wine glass trembled slightly as I set it down on the pristine white tablecloth, the deep red liquid rippling like my carefully contained anger. The grand ballroom of the Rosewood Hotel buzzed with Seattle's tech elite, their polite laughter and clicking glasses forming a stark contrast to my husband James's booming voice. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Let me tell you about my wife's inheritance, James announced. To his executive team, his hand heavy on my shoulder. Gabriella here thinks her grandfather left her something valuable. His words dripped with condescension as he addressed the gathered crowd of startup founders and venture capitalists. I maintained my practiced smile, the one I'd perfected over 5 years of marriage, smoothing my black evening gown as if it were the most fascinating task in the world. Around us, crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the annual Tech Fusion Company Gala, where my husband loved to hold court as the celebrated CEO of one of Seattle's fastest-growing software companies. You see, James continued, warming to his favorite topic of mockery, her grandfather was this old-school investor, barely knew how to use email. He turned to Alexander Wright, his newly appointed CFO. She keeps all these dusty old stock certificates in a safety deposit box, won't even let me digitize them. The group chuckled nervously, their eyes darting between us. I caught Naomi Parker's gaze across the table. As Tech Fusion's lead counsel, she'd been instrumental in several key acquisitions. Her slight frown was nearly imperceptible, but I recognized it. The same expression she wore when reviewing particularly challenging contracts. Not that my husband knew anything about those meetings. Gabriella, Alexander interrupted smoothly. I'd actually be quite interested in hearing about your grandfather's investment philosophy. Oh, Alex, James waved his hand dismissively. Trust me, it's nothing but ancient paper from dead companies. Right, honey? His fingers dug into my shoulder with what others might mistake for affection, but I felt the possessive pressure behind it. I caught Mason Lewis's eye as he signaled the waiter for another round. As the lead partner at Vertex Ventures, Tech Fusion's primary investor, he seemed particularly uncomfortable with James's display. If my husband hadn't been so focused on himself, he might have noticed the knowing glances exchanged between Mason and me. You know what's truly valuable? James's voice grew louder as he reached for his third whiskey of the evening. Understanding modern technology, digital assets, cryptocurrency. He laughed, encouraging others to join in. Not some yellowed stock certificates from companies that probably don't even exist anymore. I watched the reactions around the table, mentally cataloging each response. 2 phones being checked under the tablecloth, 3 loosened ties, and 1 venture capitalist signaling discreetly for the check. After orchestrating countless investment meetings myself, I could spot a failing pitch from miles away. The future belongs to innovators, James declared, raising his glass. Not to those who cling to the past. Right, darling? He turned to me, with what he probably thought was an indulgent smile. No offense, but some things are better left in that safety deposit box of yours. I raised my glass along with the others, my smile never wavering. If James had been more observant, he might have noticed it didn't reach my eyes. If he'd been less focused on himself, he might have caught the meaningful looks exchanged between me and several board members. If he'd been sober enough, he might have realized that his biggest investors were paying more attention to his wife's reactions than his words. In less than an hour, everything would change. But for now, I was content to play my part, to be the wife with the worthless inheritance for one last evening. After all, I hadn't spent years protecting my grandfather's legacy by being impatient. Sometimes the sweetest victories are the ones you have to wait for. Tell them about the time you tried to explain modern portfolio management to me. I said softly, playing into his narrative. James practically jumped at the opportunity. Oh, this is perfect. He turned to Mason, barely containing his glee. She actually suggested I should diversify our company's investment strategy based on her grandfather's old papers. Can you imagine? The laughter that followed was weak, forced. I noticed Naomi checking her watch for the third time in 5 minutes. Several other executives were exchanging meaningful glances, and Mason was typing something on his phone beneath the table. James? Naomi spoke up, her voice carrying that quiet authority I'd come to admire. Perhaps we should discuss the upcoming board meeting. The board can wait, James interrupted, riding high on his own perceived brilliance. I'm teaching these gentlemen a valuable lesson about the difference between old money and real innovation. My wife here, he squeezed my shoulder again. She means well, but she's living in the past. Right, honey? I dabbed my lips with the napkin, taking my time before responding. Actually, James, I'd love to hear more about the board meeting. His laugh cut through the air like a knife. See what I mean? Adorable, isn't she? Trying to participate in tech talk. Next thing you know, she'll be giving us advice on artificial intelligence and market valuation. My phone buzzed silently in my lap. A message from Mason. Everything's ready for tomorrow. Board approval confirmed. I studied the screen briefly before returning it to my purse, remembering the moment 5 years ago when I decided to keep my grandfather's legacy separate from my marriage. But tonight was different. Tonight, the carefully constructed wall between Gabriella Thompson, devoted wife, and Gabriella Blackwood, majority shareholder of Blackwood Investments, was about to crumble. The empire my grandfather had built, the one James dismissed as worthless paper, was about to remind the tech world that innovation isn't everything. Old money still had power, real power. As I excused myself from the table, James's voice followed me toward the powder room. My wife wouldn't understand the complexities of what we do in tech, he boasted. She's better suited for keeping track of her grandfather's paper collection. In the elegant solitude of the powder room, I checked my phone again. 3 urgent messages from the Blackwood Investments Board and a brief text from Mason. Legal team standing by. Everything's in place. I studied my reflection in the gilded mirror, remembering my grandfather's words on his deathbed. Patience. Little owl. The best investors know when to stay quiet and when to show their hand. Tomorrow, James would learn exactly what that hand was worth. Returning to the dining room, I found James in rare form. The whiskey had loosened his tongue further, and he was now fully committed to his impromptu lecture on the evolution of modern investment strategies. The crystal chandeliers of the Rosewood's grand ballroom cast dancing shadows across his animated face as he held court. You see, gentlemen, he gestured broadly with his glass, nearly spilling its contents on his $3,000 custom suit. The problem with old-school investors like my wife's grandfather is they never understood disruption. They were too busy collecting dividend checks to see the future. I smoothed my dress as I took my seat, catching Naomi's subtle eye roll. As Tech Fusion's lead counsel, she'd seen her share of James's grandstanding, but tonight's performance was reaching new heights. The ballroom's opulent decor, all gold leaf and crystal, seemed to fuel his sense of self-importance. Tell them about those stock certificates, darling. James turned to me, his words slightly slurred. The ones you keep visiting in that safety deposit box like they're some kind of treasure. He winked at Mason Lewis, who was doing a poor job of hiding his discomfort. She goes there every month, you know. Probably dusts them off and everything. What James didn't know was that those monthly visits weren't about nostalgia. They were board meetings. Blackwood Investments might prefer paper records, but our reach in the modern business world ran deeper than anyone suspected, especially my husband. Actually, James, Mason cleared his throat, I'd be very interested in hearing about traditional investment strategies. Sometimes the old ways... Old ways? James barked out a laugh. Mason, my friend, That's why you're just a venture capitalist. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. And I'm a tech visionary. No offense, honey. He patted my hand condescendingly. But your grandfather's approach to business died with him. Tech Fusion represents the future. The irony of his statement wasn't lost on anyone at the table who knew the truth. Tech Fusion's remarkable success had a lot to do with the mysterious angel investor who'd swooped in during their early funding rounds. An investor who insisted on remaining anonymous and communicating only through layers of legal representatives. Speaking of Tech Fusion's future, Naomi interjected, we should discuss the upcoming shareholder meeting. Shareholders, James waved dismissively. That's another thing these old-school investors never understood. In the tech world, it's about vision, not voting rights. Right, Alexander? Alexander Wright, the CFO, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. As the newest member of the executive team, he was still learning to navigate James's moods. Well, actually, voting rights are quite significant. Alexander, James shook his head. You're thinking too traditionally. That's probably why you were surprised by our latest funding round structure. He turned to the table conspiratorially. Would you believe he wanted to do a detailed ownership audit? In a tech company? His laughter boomed across the ballroom, causing several nearby tables to glance our way. I took a slow sip of water, remembering the ownership audit that Alexander had attempted last month. He'd been quietly blocked by a complex web of holding companies and legal entities, all leading back to a safety deposit box in Seattle First National Bank. You know what your grandfather would have done with Tech Fusion? James continued, warming to his favorite topic. He would have demanded dividend payments, traditional board oversight, voting rights. He sneered at the words. He never would have understood our vision for artificial intelligence, blockchain integration, and digital transformation. Mason checked his phone again, then gave me an almost imperceptible nod. Everything was in place for tomorrow. I felt a familiar calm settle over me, the same feeling I had during major investment decisions. Patience had always been my greatest asset. James, I spoke softly, knowing it would make him lean in to hear me. Perhaps we should discuss something. Else? The guests might not find corporate structure as fascinating as you do. His condescending smile was immediate and predictable. See what I mean? He gestured to the table. Always trying to protect me from myself, just like her grandfather, always worried about propriety and traditional business etiquette. The mention of propriety coming from a man on his fifth whiskey of the evening might have been amusing if it weren't so tragic. Around the table, I could see the growing discomfort among Seattle's tech elite. These were people who respected old money, even if they didn't advertise it. You know what the best decision I ever made was? James announced, his voice carrying across the ballroom. Keeping my company private, no traditional shareholders telling me what to do, no quarterly earnings calls, no answering to anyone but my own vision. I caught Mason attempting to suppress a smile. As the lead partner at Vertex Ventures, he knew exactly how private Tech Fusion really was. After all, he'd helped structure the holding companies that obscured Blackwood Investments' controlling interest. Traditional investors, James continued, his voice dripping with disdain. They think ownership is about percentages and voting rights. But in the tech world, it's about disruption, about moving fast and breaking things. Right, honey? He turned to me with that familiar, patronizing smile. Tell them about how your grandfather insisted on reading every annual report, every shareholder letter. He did believe in due diligence, I replied quietly, thinking of the comprehensive report sitting in my office at Blackwood Investments, documenting every misstep and questionable decision James had made over the past 5 years. Due diligence, James laughed. In tech, by the time you finish your due diligence, the opportunity is gone. That's why traditional investors like your grandfather never made it in the modern world. They were too busy counting their dividend checks to see the future. The irony of his statement hung in the air like the crystal chandeliers above us, beautiful, expensive, and potentially devastating if they fell, just like James's illusion of control over his company, to innovation. James raised his glass, sloshing whiskey onto the white tablecloth, and to leaving the past where it belongs, in safety deposit boxes with worthless paper. As the uncomfortable toast concluded, I noticed Alexander studying the wine stain spreading across the tablecloth. As a numbers man, he'd always been uncomfortable with James's dismissal of traditional financial oversight. Tomorrow, he would finally understand why. My phone buzzed again. Another message from the Blackwood Investments legal team. Final documents prepared. Board meeting scheduled for 9 a.m. I allowed myself a small smile. In less than 12 hours, James would learn that those worthless stock certificates represented something far more valuable than paper. They represented control. More wine, darling. James's voice cut through my thoughts. You seem awfully interested in your phone. Tonight, not reading investment advice from your grandfather's old journals, are you? He chuckled at his own joke, encouraging others to join in. No, James, I replied, my voice steady. Just confirming some arrangements for tomorrow. Ah, yes, he nodded, sagely. Another visit to the safety deposit box, I assume? You know, gentlemen. He turned to the table again. My wife treats those certificates like they're made of gold. If only she understood that real value in today's world is digital, not printed on paper. Tomorrow, James would learn exactly what those papers were worth. But for now, I simply smiled and played my part, letting him bask in his presumed superiority for one last evening. After all, my grandfather had taught me that the best strategy was always patience. And tomorrow would prove just how well I'd learned that lesson. Your safety deposit box must be getting crowded with all that worthless paper, James announced as the dessert course arrived, his voice carrying across the ballroom with practiced theatricality. Maybe we should digitize everything and save you those monthly visits. I watched as the server placed an elaborate chocolate soufflé in front of him, noting how his hand trembled slightly as he reached for his dessert spoon. After 5 years of marriage, I'd learned to read the signs of his impending social spiral. The combination of whiskey and an audience always made him particularly reckless. You know what's in that box, Mason? James turned to his primary venture, Capitalist, who was doing his best to appear interested. Stock certificates from companies that probably don't even exist anymore. Railroads, steel mills, oil companies, dinosaurs of the business world. Naomi Parker, our lead counsel, shifted uncomfortably in her seat. As one of the few people who knew the truth about Blackwood Investments' current holdings, she understood exactly how wrong James was. Those dinosaur companies had evolved into some of the most powerful conglomerates in modern business, including several key suppliers to Tech Fusion. Actually, James, Mason spoke up, his voice measured, traditional industries still form the backbone of yesterday, James interrupted, warming to his theme. Tell them, Gabriella, tell them about your grandfather's obsession with blue-chip stocks and dividend yields. He turned to Alexander Wright, his CFO. Can you imagine? In today's market? I dabbed my lips with the napkin, taking my time before responding. My grandfather believed in building lasting value, I said quietly, thinking of the empire he'd carefully constructed, the one I'd spent years protecting and expanding. Lasting value. James laughed, the sound echoing off the ballroom's ornate ceiling. In tech, value is about disruption, about moving fast and breaking things. Right, Alexander? Alexander managed a weak smile, his discomfort evident. As CFO, he'd been trying for months to get a clear picture of Tech Fusion's ownership structure. The web of holding companies and investment vehicles had proven impenetrable, exactly as designed. Speaking of breaking things, Naomi interjected, smoothly, perhaps we should discuss the upcoming board. Board meetings, shareholder rights, voting structures. James waved his hand dismissively. That's exactly the kind of outdated thinking I'm talking about. You sound just like Gabriella's grandfather. I caught Mason checking his watch. The third time in the past 15 minutes. The carefully orchestrated timeline for tomorrow's revelations was set, and James's behavior tonight was making it almost too perfect. You know what real power is in today's world? James continued, signaling for another whiskey. Information, digital assets, blockchain, not paper certificates in a safety deposit box. He turned to the table conspiratorially. She won't even let me see them. Claims it was her grandfather's dying wish, keeping them private. If he'd been more observant, he might have noticed the slight smirk that crossed Mason's face. After all, he'd helped structure many of those private holdings, ensuring they remained hidden until exactly the right moment. Tell them about last month, James urged, his words slightly slurred. When you tried to explain to me about voting, rights and shareholder control, as if that matters in a tech company. I remembered that conversation well. It had been my last attempt to warn him, to make him understand that his dismissal of traditional corporate structures might have consequences. But James, as always, had been too convinced of his own brilliance to listen. My wife, he announced to the table, thinks she understands corporate control because her grandfather left her some old paper in a box. Meanwhile, I'm building the future of technology, transforming industries, creating real value. The irony of his statement wasn't lost on those at the table who knew the truth. TechFusion's transformation had been funded largely by mystery investors, all roads leading back to Blackwood Investments, though James had never bothered to investigate too deeply. To be fair, Alexander attempted to interject. Traditional corporate governance does provide important. Alexander, James cut him off. That's why you're the CFO and I'm the visionary. No offense, Gabriella. He patted my hand condescendingly. But some people are just meant to count numbers, while others are meant to change the world. I felt my phone buzz again in my lap. Another update from the Blackwood Investments legal team. Tomorrow's documents were ready, the press releases prepared, the board members alerted. In less than 12 hours, James would learn exactly what those worthless papers were worth. You know what's funny? James continued, his voice growing louder as the whiskey took its toll. Last week, Gabriella suggested I should consider adding more traditional investors to our cap table. Can you believe it? He laughed, encouraging others to join in. As if TechFusion needs old money when we're inventing the future. Around the HU table, I noticed the subtle signs of discomfort. Loosened ties, checked phones, shifted glances. These were people who understood the power of old money, even if they worked in new technologies. They recognized the danger in James's dismissive attitude, even if he didn't. Perhaps, Naomi suggested carefully, we should discuss the upcoming shareholder meeting. Shareholders! James practically shouted. That's exactly what I'm talking about. In the old world, shareholders had power. In the tech world, it's about vision, about disruption, about understanding who really controls your company? I asked softly, unable to resist. The table fell silent. For a moment, I thought I might have tipped my hand too early. But James just laughed again, patting my shoulder with what he probably thought was affection. See what I mean? He gestured to the group. She thinks because her grandfather left her some paper certificates, she understands corporate control. Tell them, darling, about how you tried to explain voting rights to me last month, I maintained. My practiced smile, thinking about the voting rights he'd dismissed so casually. The same rights that would be exercised tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. sharp. James, Mason spoke up, his voice carrying a warning note that my husband was too drunk to recognize. Perhaps we should change the subject. No, this is important, James insisted. Everyone needs to understand why traditional business thinking is dead. My wife here, he squeezed my shoulder again. She represents the old way. Safety deposit boxes full of paper, obsessing over shareholder rights and voting. Control. But I represent the future. My phone buzzed one final time. All board members confirmed for tomorrow. Legal team standing by. I slipped it back into my purse, feeling a calm settle over me. The same calm my grandfather had taught me to maintain during major market moves. To the future! James raised his glass unsteadily. And to leaving the past where it belongs, in safety deposit boxes with worthless paper. The toast was met, with uncomfortable murmurs and half-raised glasses. In the awkward silence that followed, I could almost hear the clock ticking down to tomorrow morning's revelation. You know what your grandfather never understood? James continued, oblivious to the tension around him. Control in modern business isn't about paper certificates and voting rights. It's about vision, about technology, about knowing what you actually own, I suggested quietly. James laughed again, but this time I noticed a few knowing smiles around the table. Tomorrow, everyone would understand exactly what those worthless certificates in my safety deposit box really meant. But for now, I was content to play my part for one last evening. After all, my grandfather had taught me that the best investors know when to stay quiet and when to show their hand, and tomorrow morning, I would finally show mine. As the gala entered its final hour, I excused myself from the table, leaving James to continue his performance for an increasingly uncomfortable audience. The Rosewood Hotel's marble-lined hallways provided a quiet escape from my husband's booming declarations about the death of traditional business models. Gabriella? Naomi's voice caught me just as I reached the ladies' room. Our lead counsel had followed me, her expression a mix of concern and anticipation. Are you sure you want to go through with this tomorrow? Once we start? There's no going back. The elegant powder room was empty, its golden-framed mirrors reflecting our conversation across the Art Deco-inspired space. I checked my phone again. 3 urgent messages from Blackwood's board members and a final confirmation from our PR team. Do you know what my grandfather told me the day he signed over control of Blackwood Investments? I turned to Naomi, remembering that moment 5 years ago. He said, "Little owl, in business, timing isn't just about when you make your move. It's about waiting until your opponent has positioned themselves perfectly for their own defeat." Naomi leaned against the marble countertop, her designer dress catching the warm light of the vintage sconces. James has certainly positioned himself. That display out there? She shook her head. I've never seen him so dismissive of traditional corporate structures. Because he truly believes he's untouchable, I replied, reapplying my lipstick with steady hands. Tech fusion is his proof that the old rules don't apply anymore. That corporate control is about vision, not voting rights. My phone buzzed again. A message from Mason. Press releases approved. Financial media alerted for tomorrow's announcement. Trading desk ready for market reaction. Alexander tried to warn him, Naomi mused. The ownership audit he attempted last month. If James had paid attention. James sees what he expects to see, I interrupted softly. And he expects to see his wife dutifully visiting her grandfather's worthless stock certificates every month, clinging to outdated notions of corporate governance. The door opened, and Sasha Reynolds, one of Tech Fusion's senior board members, entered. Her eyes met mine in the mirror, and she gave a slight nod. As one of the few independent directors who knew the truth about Blackwood Investments' control, she'd been instrumental in maintaining the illusion for the past 5 years. The old guard is getting nervous out there, Sasha reported, checking her appearance in the mirror. James is now explaining how shareholder voting rights are relics of the industrial age. I couldn't help but smile at the irony. Those relics are about to remind him that some business principles are timeless. The timing is perfect, Naomi added, scrolling through her phone. The financial press has been speculating about Tech Fusion's mysterious ownership structure for months, ever since that failed hostile takeover attempt. The attempted takeover had been orchestrated by a rival tech firm, convinced that Tech Fusion's unclear ownership structure made it vulnerable. They'd discovered too late that the company's visionary CEO actually answered to a board controlled by hidden interests. Everything's prepared for tomorrow? Sasha asked, though she already knew the answer. As chair of the governance committee, she'd helped draft the resolutions that would be presented at the 9 a.m. board meeting. I nodded, thinking of the documents waiting in my office at Blackwood Investments, the same office James thought was a small charity foundation I helped manage. The revelation of Blackwood's controlling interest will happen in 3 stages: board meeting at 9 a.m., press release at 9:30, and my public statement at 10. James won't know what hit him, Naomi shook her head. All those months of mocking, traditional corporate governance, dismissing shareholder rights. While his largest shareholder sat across the breakfast table, Sasha finished, a hint of admiration in her voice. Your grandfather would be proud, Gabriella. You've not only preserved his legacy, you've adapted it for the modern age. My phone lit up with another message, this time from Alexander, our CFO. Final ownership analysis completed. Documentation. Ready for tomorrow's filing. Are you sure about this? Speaking of the modern age, Naomi glanced at her watch. We should get back before James notices we're all missing. He's probably starting another lecture on the obsolescence of paper stock, certificates. As we prepared to return to the ballroom, I caught my reflection in the mirror one last time. The woman staring back at me wasn't just James's quietly supportive wife or the dutiful granddaughter visiting her inheritance. She was the controlling shareholder of one of Seattle's fastest-growing tech companies, about to remind her husband that real power doesn't always announce itself with declarations and dismissive laughter. Gabriella, Sasha paused at the door. What will you do if James tries to challenge the voting rights tomorrow? Legally contest Blackwood's control? I smiled, thinking of the meticulous documentation my grandfather had insisted upon, documentation James had never bothered to read. Let him try. Every share certificate, every voting right, every board resolution has been properly registered and maintained. While he was busy declaring the death of traditional corporate governance, I was ensuring everything was legally perfect. The 3 of us made our way back to the ballroom, where James's voice still dominated the conversation. He was now explaining to Mason how blockchain would make traditional share certificates obsolete. You see, he gestured with his whiskey glass. In the future, all this paper pushing, all these voting rights my wife's grandfather was so obsessed with, they'll be meaningless. Digital transformation is... James, I interrupted softly, retaking my seat. Perhaps we should let our guests enjoy their dessert without another lecture on corporate governance? He laughed, patting my hand with that familiar condescension. See what I mean? Always trying to protect me from myself, just like her grandfather, always worried about propriety and proper corporate procedure. If he hadn't been so focused on his own voice, he might have noticed the knowing looks exchanged between Naomi, Sasha, and Mason. If he hadn't been 3 whiskeys past professional, he might have caught the subtle nods and glances that spoke of tomorrow's carefully orchestrated revelations. But James saw what he expected to see: a wife clinging to her grandfather's outdated business principles, unable to comprehend his grand vision of technological disruption. Tell them about the voting rights documents you tried to show me last week, he urged, encouraging the table to share his amusement. Pages and pages of legal language about shareholder control and board representation, as if any of that matters. In the age of digital transformation, those same documents would be presented to the board tomorrow morning, revealing that Blackwood Investments, through a complex web of holding companies, controlled 51% of TechFusion's voting shares. James's grand vision had been funded and controlled by the very traditional corporate structures he mockingly dismissed. To the future! James raised his glass again, his words slightly slurred. And to leaving behind all those worthless papers, in safety deposit boxes. I joined the toast, my smile never wavering. In less than 12 hours, those worthless papers would remind the business world that some principles of corporate control never go out of style. The drive home from the Rosewood Hotel was silent except for James's occasional self-congratulatory mumbling about his performance at the gala. Seattle's late-night streets glistened with typical autumn rain, the droplets catching the glow of streetlights like tiny diamonds, not unlike the way James's tech empire would shatter in just a few hours. Showed them. Showed everyone. Future of technology, he slurred from the passenger seat, his head lolling against the window. I'd insisted on driving, knowing his state, and, more importantly, needing to make one last stop before heading home. We need to stop by my charity office, I said casually, turning down Madison Avenue. I left some important papers for tomorrow's meeting. James merely grunted in response. In 5 years, he'd never once visited my supposed charity office, a fact that had made it the perfect cover for Blackwood Investments' Seattle headquarters. The gleaming 40-story building housed one of the city's most powerful investment firms, though James had never made the connection between the Blackwood name and my family legacy. You know what's funny? James suddenly perked up as we pulled into the private underground garage. All those old companies your grandfather invested in, they probably don't even exist anymore. Imagine still believing in paper certificates in 2025. I smiled faintly as I parked in my reserved spot, marked CEO, though James was too far gone to notice. I won't be long, I said softly, but he was already dozing off again. The elevator recognized my fingerprint shooting straight up to the executive floor. At 11:30 p.m., the office was quiet but not empty. Mason, Naomi, and Sasha were waiting in my corner office, along with Alexander, who'd left the gala early to finalize tomorrow's documentation. That was quite a performance your husband put on. Tonight? Sasha said, her voice tight with controlled anger. I don't know how you've managed to keep this secret for so long, Gabriella. I settled behind my desk, the familiar leather chair grounding me. The wall of windows behind me offered a spectacular view of Seattle's skyline, the Space Needle illuminated against the night sky. James sees what he expects to see, I replied. And he expects to see his wife faithfully visiting her grandfather's worthless legacy every month. Alexander slid a folder across my desk. The final paperwork is ready. Once you sign these, we can proceed with tomorrow's revelation of Blackwood's controlling interest in Tech Fusion. Are you absolutely sure about this? Mason asked quietly. It will effectively end his control over the company. I opened the folder, uncapping my Mont Blanc pen, a gift I'd given myself after my first billion-dollar acquisition. James built his reputation on 3 pillars: his visionary leadership, his dismissal of traditional corporate governance, and his absolute control of Tech Fusion. I looked up at my colleagues, my friends who'd kept my secret all these years. As of tomorrow morning, all 3 will crumble. He never once suspected? Naomi asked, shaking her head in disbelief. Even though Blackwood Investments has been outperforming every major tech fund for the past 5 years? I signed the final document with a flourish. James's ego wouldn't allow him to see it. Do you know he actually laughed when he heard rumors that Blackwood was run by a woman? Said it had to be fake news because women don't have the killer instinct for modern finance. The press release is scheduled for 9:30 a.m., Sasha confirmed, gathering her papers. Your husband's company will lose its visionary CEO status within the first hour of trading. What will you tell him? Alexander asked, his accountant's precision showing in his furrowed brow. When he realizes that all those board meetings you attended weren't for charity work? A sad smile crossed my face. The truth, that while he was busy mocking traditional corporate governance, I was using it to build an empire that now controls his company. I checked my phone, a text from my driver confirming James was still asleep in the car. How's the market positioning looking? I asked Mason. The timing couldn't be better, he replied. The tech sector is already nervous about companies with unclear ownership structures. When it's revealed that Tech Fusion's CEO doesn't actually control his own company and has been unwittingly answering to his wife's family investment firm, it's going to send shockwaves through the industry. Your grandfather would be proud, Naomi added softly. He always said the best investors are the ones no one sees coming. The irony, Sasha mused, is that if James had ever bothered to attend one of your charity events, he might have noticed they were actually Blackwood investment meetings. If he'd ever asked about your monthly visits to the safety deposit box, but he didn't, I finished. Because in his mind, I was just a wife maintaining her grandfather's outdated legacy. And tomorrow he'll learn exactly what that legacy is. Worth. We rode down in the elevator together, these powerful executives who had become my closest allies. They had seen past the facade I presented at James's dinner parties, recognized the business acumen I wielded quietly but effectively. Your car is ready, Ms. Blackwood, my security guard said as we reached the garage. The others walked to their own vehicles while I returned to where James slept, blissfully unaware that in less than 10 hours, his carefully constructed world would collapse. As I drove us home through the quiet city streets, I thought about the moment 5 years ago when I'd chosen to keep my professional life separate from my marriage. It had seemed easier then, simpler to let James believe what he wanted about his wife's capabilities and her grandfather's legacy. Had a great night, James mumbled as I helped him into bed. Showed everyone how outdated those old business models are. I watched him fall back asleep, already dreading tomorrow's hangover, though it would be nothing compared to the headache waiting for him at the 9 a.m. board meeting. Yes, dear, I whispered. Tomorrow you'll see exactly what those outdated models can do. I woke before sunrise, leaving James still snoring off his whiskey haze. By 7 a.m., I was back in my office at Blackwood Investments, watching the early morning light paint Seattle's skyline in shades of promise. Behind me, the wall-mounted screens silently displayed financial news tickers, all about to carry a story that would shake the tech world's foundations. The press releases are ready, Naomi announced as she entered my office, tablet in hand. We've got exclusive interviews lined up with CNBC, Bloomberg, and the Wall Street Journal. They're particularly interested in the human angle, the CEO who dismissed traditional corporate governance, only to discover his company was controlled by his wife's family investment firm. I skimmed the press release on my tablet, making a few minor adjustments. Make sure they understand this isn't about revenge, I instructed. It's about business. Tech Fusion needs proper corporate governance and accountability, especially given its market position. Speaking of market position, Mason joined us, his usually immaculate suit showing signs of a sleepless night. The trading desk is ready. We're expecting significant volatility once the news breaks. My phone buzzed, a text from Alexander. James just arrived at the office. 3 aspirin and 4 cups of coffee. Keeps saying last night was a triumph. Has he checked any of his messages? I asked, knowing the answer. James never checked his messages before his morning team meeting. Another habit I'd counted on when planning this revelation. 15 missed calls from board members, Alexander replied. He thinks they're calling to congratulate him on last night's speech about the death of traditional corporate governance. The irony would have been amusing if it weren't so tragic. I pulled up the live feed from Tech Fusion's executive floor on one of my office screens. James was striding through the open office space, stopping occasionally to regale junior employees with what he probably thought were visionary insights. Miss Blackwood, my assistant appeared at the door. The board members are assembled in the main conference room. They're ready whenever you are. I checked the time. 8:45 a.m. 15 minutes. Until the board meeting that would change everything. Has James tried to reach any of our key investors this morning? He's left 6 messages for Mason, Naomi reported, a slight smirk playing at her lips. Apparently, he wants to schedule a follow-up meeting to capitalize on last night's momentum. If he only knew what kind of momentum he created, Sasha added, entering with the final set of documents. His speech about the worthlessness of shareholder voting rights is already circulating among the board members. The timing couldn't be more perfect. At 8:55, I stood, smoothing my blazer. Is everyone in position? Mason nodded. trading desk, is ready for the market reaction. PR team is standing by. Legal has triple-checked every document. And James? Just sat down in the Tech Fusion boardroom, Alexander confirmed, checking his phone. Still hasn't read any of his messages. He's telling everyone about how he educated the city's top investors about the obsolescence of traditional corporate structures. Then it's time, I said quietly, gathering my papers. Shall we go educate him about those structures? The walk to Tech Fusion's offices took exactly 3 minutes. One of the reasons I'd chosen this building for Blackwood's headquarters years ago. As we rode up in the elevator, I thought about all the times James had dismissed my grandfather's business principles, mocked my monthly visits to the safety deposit box, laughed at the idea of traditional corporate governance. Ready? Naomi asked as the elevator doors opened on Tech Fusion's executive floor. I checked my watch. 8:59 a.m. Time to show my husband exactly what those worthless papers are worth. James's voice carried through the boardroom doors. Once everyone arrives, I want to discuss expanding our digital transformation initiatives. Last night proved that the old guard is finally ready to embrace our vision. I pushed open the doors, followed by Mason, Naomi, and Sasha. The conversation in the room died immediately. James, standing at the head of the table, faltered mid-sentence. Gabriella? His confusion was evident. What are you doing here? And why are Mason and Naomi with you? Good morning, James, I said calmly, taking my seat at the opposite end of the table. I believe it's time we had a proper discussion about corporate governance. Corporate governance? He laughed, though there was an edge of uncertainty in his voice. Honey, this is a board meeting. We're discussing serious business matters, not your grandfather's outdated theories. I opened my folder, laying out the documents I'd signed last night. Actually, James, that's exactly why I'm here. As the controlling shareholder of Tech Fusion through Blackwood Investments, I think it's time we reviewed some of those outdated theories. The color drained from his face. Controlling? What are you talking about? Perhaps, I suggested quietly, you should have paid more attention to those worthless papers in my safety deposit box. They represent 51% of Tech Fusion's voting shares, held through various Blackwood investment vehicles. James gripped the back of his chair, his knuckles white. This is impossible. I control this company. I'm the majority shareholder. No, James. Mason spoke up. You're the CEO, appointed by the board, which is controlled by Blackwood Investments. Your personal stake is just 12%. All those mysterious angel investors who funded Tech Fusion's early rounds? Naomi added. The ones who insisted on remaining anonymous? That was Blackwood Investments. That was Gabriella. James sank into his chair, his face ashen. The monthly charity meetings, the safety deposit box visits, board meetings, I corrected, gently. Investment committee reviews. All those times you mocked my grandfather's approach to business? I was actually implementing it, right under your nose. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. On the wall-mounted screens, financial news tickers began showing unusual trading activity in Tech Fusion's stock, as the market sensed something was coming. Why? James finally asked, his voice barely a whisper. Why go through this charade? It wasn't initially planned, I admitted, but when you immediately assumed I was just maintaining some worthless family legacy, when you laughed at the idea of traditional corporate governance, I paused, letting the moment stretch. You showed me exactly who you were, so I showed you exactly what you expected to see. The boardroom doors opened again as the rest of Tech Fusion's directors filed in. James watched, helpless, as his carefully constructed world began to crumble. The press release goes out in 20 minutes, I informed him. It will announce Blackwood Investments' controlling interest in Tech Fusion, along with new corporate governance measures to ensure proper oversight and accountability. You can't do this, he protested weakly. I'm your husband. And I'm your controlling shareholder. I replied firmly. Something you might have discovered if you'd ever taken those worthless papers seriously. The next 30 minutes unfolded like a carefully orchestrated symphony. As the board members took their seats, James remained frozen in his chair, watching his empire slip through his fingers with each passing moment. The wall-mounted screens now displayed TechFusion's stock price, which had begun to fluctuate wildly, as rumors of a major announcement spread through the market. Before we proceed with the formal meeting, I began, my voice carrying that quiet authority I'd inherited from my grandfather. I believe we should address the elephant in the room. Mason, would you like to present the ownership analysis? Mason stood, clicking through a presentation that appeared on the screens. As you can see, TechFusion's ownership structure is actually quite traditional, despite public perception. Blackwood Investments, through various holding companies, controls 51% of voting shares. James Thompson personally holds 12%. The remaining 37% is distributed among other institutional investors, all of whom have been consulted about today's announcement. This is ridiculous, James finally found his voice, though it trembled slightly. I founded this company. I built it from nothing. With funding from Blackwood Investments, Naomi corrected, sliding documents across the table. Every major funding round, every significant expansion, was financed through investment vehicles ultimately controlled by your wife's family firm. The color had completely drained from James's face as he stared at the papers in front of him. I could see him processing the dates, the numbers, the carefully constructed web of investments that had given me control while maintaining his illusion of autonomy. All those board meetings you thought were charity events, Sasha added, her voice carrying a hint of satisfaction. All those times you mocked Gabriella's monthly visits to the safety deposit box. You never once questioned why Seattle's top executives attended her charity functions. Because he couldn't imagine I was capable of anything more significant, I said quietly. Isn't that right, James? He looked up at me, really looked at me, perhaps for the first time in our marriage. The anonymous angel investor group, the one that saved us during the tech crash last year. Blackwood Investments, I confirmed. Though you were too busy declaring the death of traditional corporate governance to investigate too deeply. The screen suddenly flickered as CNBC's breaking news banner appeared. Breaking. TechFusion CEO faces surprise revelation. Wife's family investment firm reveals controlling interest. James watched in horror as the ticker showed our stock price beginning to drop. You've destroyed everything I built, he whispered. No, James, I corrected firmly. I protected this company while you were busy undermining its foundations. Every time you dismissed proper corporate governance, every time you mocked traditional investment principles, you were weakening TechFusion's future. Mr. Thompson, Alexander spoke up, his CFO's precision evident in his tone. As I tried to tell you during the ownership audit last month, our corporate structure has always been traditional. You just refuse to see it. The boardroom doors opened again as our PR team entered, tablets in hand. The full press release has gone live, Lisa, our communications director, announced. CNBC, Bloomberg, and the Wall Street Journal are all requesting immediate interviews. Tell them we'll hold a proper press conference at 11, I instructed. For now, let's focus on the board meeting agenda. I turned back to James, who seemed to be aging years with each passing minute. Unless you'd like to resign before we begin the formal proceedings? Resign? He barked out a harsh laugh. From my own company? From the company controlled by Blackwood Investments, Mason corrected. The board will be voting on new governance measures today, including the separation of the CEO and chairman roles. James's hand trembled as he reached for his water glass. All this time, every month when you visited that safety deposit box, I was attending board meetings, reviewing investment strategies, and managing one of Seattle's largest investment firms, I finished for him. While you were busy telling everyone that traditional corporate governance was dead, I was using those same principles to build something lasting. The screens now showed all major financial networks covering the story. The ticker beneath displayed our stock price, which had stabilized as the market digested the news that Tech Fusion was actually controlled by a respected investment firm. "Your grandfather," James said slowly, realization dawning in his eyes. "All those stories about his old-fashioned approach to business were exactly what you expected to hear," I nodded. "You wanted to believe I was clinging to outdated principles, so that's what I showed you." Meanwhile, Blackwood Investments was modernizing those same principles for the digital age. The monthly charity meetings? His voice was barely audible now. "Investment committee reviews," Sasha supplied, attended by half of Seattle's tech leaders, the same ones you dismissed as old guard last night. "Which brings us to our first order of business," I continued, pulling out another document. "The board will be voting on new corporate governance measures, including the appointment of an independent chairman." "You can't do this," James protested, but his voice lacked conviction. "I'm your husband, and I'm the controlling shareholder," I reminded him. "Something you might have discovered if you'd ever bothered to look beyond your own preconceptions." The morning sunlight streamed through the boardroom windows, illuminating the Seattle skyline beyond. The same view I'd looked at countless times, from my office at Blackwood Investments, watching and waiting for this moment. "The vote will proceed as scheduled," I announced to the board. "But first, I believe my husband deserves to understand exactly how his outdated wife built this position." Nodded to Mason, who began displaying another presentation. Over the past 5 years, Blackwood Investments has systematically acquired controlling interest in key technology companies, always through complex holding structures that masked our involvement. Tech Fusion was actually one of our earliest investments. "Every time you dismissed traditional corporate governance," Naomi added, "you were actually making our job easier. No one looked too closely at the ownership structure because you kept insisting it didn't matter." The next hour moved at a dizzying pace. Outside the boardroom windows, Seattle's skyline seemed to mock James's crumbling empire as financial networks broadcast the story that was shaking the tech world. The screens that had once displayed his visionary interviews now showed a very different narrative. Tech Fusion CEO's wife, revealed as controlling shareholder through family investment firm. "The vote is final," Naomi announced, collecting the ballots from board members. "The new governance measures have been approved unanimously." She paused, glancing at James, who sat slumped in his chair. "Including the separation of CEO and chairman roles." I watched as Mason pulled up the real-time market data on the main screen. Tech Fusion's stock had stabilized after the initial shock, actually trending upward as investors processed the news that the company was controlled by a respected investment firm rather than a visionary CEO who dismissed traditional corporate governance. "Your office has been calling non-stop," Alexander reported, checking his tablet. "CNBC wants you live in 20 minutes, James. Bloomberg and WSJ are holding their top slots for exclusive interviews." James stared blankly at his phone, now flooding with messages he'd ignored all morning. "This is insane," he muttered. "My own wife. My own company." "Actually," I corrected gently, "it was never your company, James. Tech Fusion has been controlled by Blackwood Investments since its Series A funding round. You were just too convinced of your own narrative to notice." The boardroom doors opened as Lisa, our PR director, entered with a fresh stack of reports. "Social media is exploding," she announced. "The story's trending nationwide. Everyone wants to know how Seattle's most vocal critic of traditional corporate governance missed that. His own wife controlled his company." "Miss Blackwood?" My assistant appeared at the door. "Warren Buffett's office is on line 1. He says, and I quote, 'Old money still knows how to teach new tech a lesson.'" I caught Sasha hiding a smile. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. James had spent years mocking dinosaur investors like Buffett, all while his company was controlled by exactly the kind of traditional investment firm he ridiculed. "The press conference is set for 11 a.m., Naomi reported, We've got all major networks confirmed. They're particularly interested in the monthly charity meetings that were actually Blackwood Investment Committee reviews. James finally looked up from his phone, his face ashen. The charity office, your monthly meetings, even our anniversary dinner last month, was scheduled around Blackwood's quarterly board meeting, I finished. Those boring charity events you never attended? They were attended by half of Seattle's tech leaders, all reporting to me, not you. Gabriella, Mason interrupted. Reuters is running a special feature. The Hidden Power of Traditional Corporate Governance. How Old Money Quietly Controlled a Tech Empire. They're requesting a statement about your grandfather's investment, principles. A sad smile crossed my face as I thought of my grandfather's lessons. Tell them that true power doesn't need to announce itself. Sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one you should watch most carefully. The markets. Responding positively to the governance changes, Alexander noted, studying the financial data. Our institutional investors are issuing statements supporting Blackwood's control. The uncertainty discount that's been haunting our stock is disappearing. Because the market prefers clear corporate governance to move fast and break things. Philosophy, Sasha added, unable to resist the dig at James's favorite phrase. Miss Blackwood? My assistant appeared again. The Financial Times wants to know if you'll write an op-ed about hidden female leadership in tech. They're calling it The Wife Who Wasn't, How Gender Bias Helped Hide a Tech Empire. James pushed back from the table suddenly, his chair scraping against the floor. This is all very entertaining. His voice cracked with barely controlled emotion. Watching my life's work become a media circus. But what about our marriage, Gabriella? What about trust? The room fell silent. I studied my husband, the man who'd spent years dismissing my capabilities, mocking my family's legacy, and declaring, the death of traditional business principles. Trust, James. I kept my voice level. Like trusting that your wife could understand business? That she might have valuable insights? That her family's legacy might be worth respecting? That was different, he protested weakly. I was trying to protect you from what? I interrupted. From success? From power? From being taken seriously in the business world? I gestured to the screens showing Tech Fusion's strengthening stock price. I built this position while you were busy declaring that women don't understand modern business. Every time you dismissed my capabilities, you made it easier for me to work in the shadows. The press conference starts in 30 minutes. Lisa reminded us. We should prepare for the public questions about how this remained hidden for so long. The truth, I said firmly, standing. We'll tell them the truth. That sometimes the best way to hide power is to let people believe exactly what they expect to believe. As the room began to clear, James remained seated, staring at the documents that detailed Blackwood's control of his company. All those times I bragged about being independent from traditional investors. You were actually reporting to one, I finished. You just didn't know it because you couldn't imagine your wife being anything more than a charity event organizer. The safety deposit box, he said slowly. Those worthless certificates are worth about $2.1 billion at current market prices, Mason supplied helpfully. Though that value's likely to increase now that the market knows Tech Fusion has proper corporate governance. The Rosewood Hotel's grand ballroom, the same room where just 12 hours ago James had mocked my worthless inheritance, now buzzed with different energy. Journalists packed the space, their cameras trained on the podium where I would soon make my first public appearance as the controlling shareholder of Tech Fusion. 5 minutes until we go live, Lisa announced, adjusting my microphone. Every major network is carrying this. The story's already being called the greatest corporate revelation of the decade. I caught my reflection in the ballroom's ornate mirrors, the same ones that had witnessed James's condescending performance last night. My navy blazer and crisp white blouse projected exactly what I needed: competence, control, and calm authority. James is watching from his office, Naomi reported, checking her phone. The market's up 12% since the announcement. Turns out, investors prefer traditional corporate governance to visionary disruption. Mason approached with the latest market reports. Warren Buffett just tweeted, "Sometimes the best investment strategy is letting others underestimate you." It's already been shared 100,000 times. I smiled, thinking of my grandfather's similar wisdom. The cameras started rolling as I took my place at the podium, facing the world's financial press. The questions came rapid fire. "Miss Blackwood, how did you maintain this secret for 5 years?" "By letting people see what they expected to see," I responded calmly. "When you're underestimated, it's amazing what you can build in plain sight." "Was this a planned takeover of your husband's company?" "Tech Fusion was never my husband's company," I corrected. "Blackwood Investments has been the controlling shareholder since the beginning. We simply allowed James to maintain his preferred narrative about independent tech leadership." "What about the monthly charity meetings that were actually investment committee reviews?" I couldn't help but smile at that one. Those meetings were attended by Seattle's top executives, all of whom understood the value of discretion. Sometimes the best way to hide power is to let others dismiss it. "Miss Blackwood," a reporter from Bloomberg pushed forward. "Your husband repeatedly mocked traditional corporate governance. Was this revelation planned as revenge?" "This isn't about revenge," I stated firmly. "It's about proper corporate governance and responsible business management. Tech Fusion needs structure and accountability to reach its full potential." The questions continued for an hour, each one peeling back another layer of the story that was captivating the business world. Finally, Lisa called for a break, and I stepped away from the podium to find Sasha waiting with more updates. "The Wall Street Journal is running a special feature," she reported. "The Power of Paper: How Old-School Corporate Governance Outsmarted Silicon Valley. They want to interview you about your grandfather's investment principles. James is on his way down," Naomi warned, appearing at my elbow. "He's demanding a private conversation." I nodded, having expected this. "Use the small conference room. Make sure the cameras can't see us." Moments later, James burst into the room, his usual polished appearance notably disheveled. "Are you happy now?" he demanded. "You've humiliated me in front of the entire business world." "You humiliated yourself, James," I replied quietly. "Every time you mocked traditional investors, every time you dismissed proper corporate governance, you were undermining your own credibility." "This is insane," he paced the room. "My own wife, secretly controlling my company through some old money investment firm." "Again, it was never your company," I corrected. "And Blackwood Investments isn't just some old money firm. We manage over $50 billion in assets, all while you were busy declaring the death of traditional investment principles." "The charity meetings." He stopped pacing, realization dawning. "All those executives who attended, they were reporting to you, weren't they?" "They recognized the value of proper corporate governance," I explained, "while you were busy moving fast and breaking things. We were building something sustainable." "And our marriage?" His voice cracked slightly. "Was that just part of your investment strategy too?" I felt a moment of genuine sadness. "I loved you, James, but you could never see past your own preconceptions. Every time I tried to discuss business, you dismissed me. Every time I offered insights, you laughed them off. Because I thought you were just..." He trailed off, realizing how it would sound. "Just a wife?" I finished for him. "Just someone maintaining her grandfather's outdated legacy? That's exactly what you were supposed to think. Your dismissal of traditional corporate governance made it easy to work in the shadows." The door opened as Lisa peeked in. "Miss Blackwood, Harvard Business School is on the line. They want you to give a guest lecture on hidden power structures in modern business." James laughed bitterly. "Of course they do. Everyone wants to hear from the wife who outsmarted her tech visionary husband." "No," I corrected. They want to hear from the investor who understood that true power doesn't need to announce itself. My grandfather taught me that lesson, though you were too busy mocking his principles to learn from them. Your grandfather, James said slowly. All those stories about his old-fashioned approach to business were exactly what you wanted to hear. I nodded. You needed to believe I was clinging to outdated principles, so that's what I showed you. Meanwhile, Blackwood was modernizing those same principles for the digital age. The door opened again, this time revealing Mason with more market updates. The stock's up 15% now. The market clearly approves of our new governance structure. Governance structure, James repeated mockingly. All those times I declared independence from traditional corporate control, you were actually reporting to one of the most traditional firms in Seattle, I finished. You just couldn't see it because you couldn't imagine your wife being anything more than a charity event organizer. Miss Blackwood, my assistant appeared. The Financial Times wants to know if you'll write a series on hidden female leadership in tech. They're calling it The Power of Being Underestimated. I caught James's eye, seeing the final pieces click into place in his mind. All those dismissed suggestions, ignored insights, and mocked principles had actually been the foundation of something he'd failed to recognize. Real, lasting power. The safety deposit box, he said quietly. Those worthless certificates are worth about $2.1 billion at current market prices, Mason supplied helpfully, though that value's likely to increase now that the market knows TechFusion has proper corporate governance. James sank into a chair, the full weight of the revelation finally hitting him. All this time, while I was declaring the death of traditional business principles, I was using those same principles to build something lasting, I finished. Sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one you should watch most carefully. The following week unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance of revelations and realignments. From my office at Blackwood Investments, I watched as the business world adjusted to its new reality. The wall of screens displayed various financial networks, all dissecting different aspects of what the media had dubbed the Blackwood Revelation. Another interview request, Naomi announced, entering with a fresh stack of papers. Forbes wants you on their cover, The Hidden Hand, How Traditional Corporate Governance Conquered Tech. I glanced at TechFusion's stock ticker, which had stabilized at 30% above its pre-revelation price. The market had spoken clearly. Proper corporate governance was worth more than disruptive vision. James signed the separation agreement this morning, Mason reported, taking his usual seat by the window. He's stepping down as CEO, though. He wants to maintain his 12% stake. Let him keep it, I replied, signing another stack of documents. It might teach him the value of being a minority shareholder under proper corporate governance. The Seattle skyline stretched out beyond my office windows, looking different somehow. Clearer, perhaps, now that I no longer had to maintain the illusion of being just James's wife with an outdated inheritance. The Harvard Business Review piece is ready for your approval, Sasha added, sliding a tablet across my desk. The Power of Paper, How Traditional Corporate Governance Silently Shaped the Tech Revolution. They're particularly interested in your grandfather's investment principles. I smiled, thinking of those principles, the same ones James had mocked so consistently. My grandfather always said that true power doesn't need to announce itself. It just needs to be patient. Speaking of patience, Alexander entered with, the latest financial reports. Our institutional investors are thrilled with the new governance structure. The uncertainty discount that plagued our stock has completely disappeared. My phone buzzed with a text from James. Meeting at the house. Tonight, we need to talk about what happens next. Miss Blackwood, my assistant appeared at the door. Warren Buffett's office called again. He'd like to have dinner next week to discuss, in his words, how old money taught new tech a valuable lesson. The irony wasn't lost on me. James had spent years dismissing investors like Buffett as dinosaurs, unable to comprehend modern business. Now, those same dinosaurs were celebrating Blackwood's strategic patience. The Wall Street Journal is running a special series, Lisa announced, pulling up the preview on my tablet. The Renaissance of Corporate Governance: How Traditional Business Principles Quietly Conquered Silicon Valley. They want to feature Blackwood as the centerpiece. I studied the draft article, noting how it emphasized the value of traditional corporate governance in the modern age. Make sure they understand this isn't about old versus new, I instructed. It's about combining proven principles with modern opportunities. Like your grandfather always said, Sasha smiled, the best investors know when to stay quiet and when to show their hand. Another text from James appeared. The house feels empty without you. Everything feels empty now. I pushed back from my desk, walking to the window. The same view I'd looked at countless times while building this position, while letting James believe exactly what he wanted to believe about his wife's capabilities. The Financial Times piece is getting significant attention, Naomi reported. The power of being underestimated, how gender bias helped hide a corporate empire. They're calling it a wake-up call for the tech industry. It's already required reading at several business schools, Mason added. They're using it to teach about hidden power structures and the danger of assumptions in modern business. My phone buzzed again, this time a message from my grandfather's old friend, who'd helped me maintain the Blackwood legacy. Your grandfather would be proud. You didn't just preserve his principles, you proved their timeless value. Miss Blackwood, my assistant reappeared. The New York Times wants to do a profile. The wife who wasn't, how traditional corporate governance outmaneuvered Silicon Valley. I turned back to my team, these people who'd helped me maintain this delicate balance for 5 years. Schedule the Times interview, I decided. It's time to show the world that corporate governance isn't about old versus new. It's about building something lasting. And James? Naomi asked quietly. What do you want to do about his request to talk? I thought about my husband, soon to be ex-husband, and his journey from mockery to understanding. Tell him I'll meet him at the house tonight. Some conversations need to happen in private. The press will want to know about the personal angle, Lisa warned. They're already speculating about how this affects your marriage. Then we'll give them the truth, I replied. That sometimes the best way to lose power is to dismiss those you think don't have any. My phone lit up with another message, this time from the safety deposit box facility. Your monthly appointment is tomorrow, Miss Blackwood. Though I suppose you won't need to maintain the pretense anymore. I smiled, remembering all those visits that James had dismissed as sentimental attachment to worthless paper. Actually, I replied, I think I'll keep the appointment. Some traditions are worth maintaining. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across my office as I prepared for the evening ahead. On the screens, financial analysts continued to dissect the revelation that had shaken the tech world's foundations. But the real story, I knew, wasn't about hidden power or corporate governance. It was about patience, about letting others see what they expect to see, and about building something lasting while everyone else was busy declaring the death of traditional principles. Miss Blackwood? My assistant's voice interrupted my thoughts. Your car is ready whenever you want to head home. Home. The word felt different now. Like everything else, it had been transformed by the revelation of truth, by the dropping of pretenses. Tell James I'll be there in an hour, I decided. Some conversations are worth having face to face. The drive to what had once been our home felt different now. Seattle's evening lights sparkled against the rain-slicked streets as my driver navigated through the city I'd helped shape from the shadows. The same route I'd taken countless times, pretending to be just a wife returning from charity meetings, now felt like a victory lap. James was waiting in the living room when I arrived, the wall of windows behind him offering a view of the city lights. The same view he'd once claimed as a symbol of his tech empire's success, not knowing it was actually built on Blackwood Investments' foundation. You could have told me, he said quietly, as I set my purse down on the marble counter. All those years, all those times I dismissed your grandfather's principles. Would you have listened? I asked, remembering countless dinners where he'd mocked traditional corporate governance. Or would you have seen it as proof that women don't understand modern business? He flinched at that, perhaps remembering his own words from countless social occasions. The safety deposit box visits, the charity meetings, board meetings, I corrected gently, investment committee reviews, strategy sessions with the same executives you dismissed as old guard dinosaurs. The room fell silent except for the soft patter of rain against the windows. On the coffee table, financial magazines bore headlines about the revelation that had shaken the tech world. The hidden hand of traditional governance, and how old money quietly controlled tech's future. I've been offered a teaching position at Stanford Business School, James said suddenly. They want me to teach a course on corporate governance, specifically on the dangers of dismissing traditional business principles. I couldn't help but smile at the irony. The student becomes the teacher? More like the fool becomes the cautionary tale, he replied bitterly. The tech visionary who couldn't see that his own wife controlled his company through old-school corporate governance. It wasn't about control, James, I said, moving to the window. It was about building something lasting. Something that would prove my grandfather's principles still had value in the modern world. While I was busy declaring their death, he finished. God, Gabriella, do you know how many times I mocked those principles in board meetings, in press interviews? 17 major interviews, I confirmed, plus 32 conference keynotes and countless social occasions, including last week's gala, where you called my inheritance worthless paper. He sank into the leather armchair, the same one where he'd often lectured me about the obsolescence of traditional business models. How did you maintain the secret for so long? By letting you see exactly what you expected to see, I replied. Every time you dismissed my capabilities, every time you mocked my grandfather's legacy, you made it easier to work in the shadows. My phone buzzed, another message from the Financial Times. Final draft ready for your approval. The power of being underestimated. How gender bias helped hide a corporate empire. The press is calling it the greatest corporate revelation of the decade, James noted, gesturing to the magazines. The wife who outmaneuvered Silicon Valley while being dismissed as a charity event organizer. The press loves a good story, I acknowledged, but the real lesson isn't about deception or control. It's about the danger of assumptions, about the power of patience, about the value of traditional principles in a modern world. Your grandfather, James said slowly, all those stories about his old-fashioned approach to business were exactly what you needed to believe, I finished. You needed to see me as someone clinging to outdated principles, so that's what I showed you. Meanwhile, Blackwood was modernizing those same principles for the digital age. Outside, the Seattle rain had intensified, drumming against the windows like an accompaniment to our conversation. Each drop seemed to echo the falling pieces of James's carefully constructed worldview. I've been asked to resign from the tech industry's Innovation Council, he said, a hint of irony in his voice. Apparently, being outmaneuvered by traditional corporate governance doesn't inspire confidence in one's visionary status. And yet, Tech Fusion's stock is up 35% since the revelation, I pointed out. The market seems to prefer clear governance to disruptive vision. My phone buzzed again, Mason this time. Harvard Business School case study approved. The Blackwood revelation. Traditional governance in the digital age will be required. Reading next semester. You know what the worst part is? James looked up, his face showing the weight of realization. If I had ever bothered to attend one of your charity events, if I'd ever taken your insights seriously, we could have built something remarkable together, I finished softly. Instead of working in parallel, instead of maintaining this divide, instead, I became the cautionary tale. He nodded. the tech visionary who was so busy declaring the death of traditional business principles that he couldn't see them working right under his nose. I moved to gather my things, our conversation drawing to its natural close. The divorce papers will be ready next week. You can keep your 12% stake in Tech Fusion. Consider it a lesson in being a minority shareholder under proper corporate governance. Gabriella, he called as I reached the door. Your grandfather. What would he say about all this? I paused, thinking of the man who'd taught me that true power doesn't need to announce itself. He would say that sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one you should watch most carefully, and that the best investment strategy is letting others underestimate you. As I stepped into the elevator, my phone lit up with one final message, this time from Warren Buffett. Your grandfather was right. Old money doesn't need to shout to be heard. Looking forward to dinner next week. The rain had stopped by the time I reached my car, leaving the city streets glistening under the evening lights. Behind me, the house that had witnessed 5 years of pretense grew smaller in the rearview mirror. Ahead, the Seattle skyline beckoned, a testament to the power of patience, the value of traditional principles, and the quiet strength of being underestimated. Where to, Miss Blackwood? My driver asked. Blackwood Investments, I replied, thinking of the empire I'd built while others weren't watching. It's time to show the world that some principles never go out of style. The story ends, but its lesson remains. In a world obsessed with disruption and revolution, sometimes the greatest power lies in being underestimated, in letting others see what they expect to see, and in proving that traditional principles don't need to shout to be heard. They just need to work silently, effectively, and with unwavering patience until the right moment to reveal their true worth. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.